For anyone who's out there, we're giving it just a few more seconds to see if any stragglers log in. We'll kick it off in about 20 seconds. All right. Well, we are very excited to be here with you today to present on a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. And I have a quick technical question first for our Neshco sponsor, Emily. Can I ask a question real quick? Will we be able to see if attendees do, for example, hands up or not? Either, there's no wrong answer.
So I think you will be able to, but they are muted. So I would say if they have questions, they should just put them in the chat.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. That's so helpful. So maybe we'll skip the hands up feature. But what we wanted to start with was basically to do a quick poll of whoever's out there right now and see how many of you are actually the ones who are creating, writing the content for your organizations. So if anyone is a writer out there and you feel like, putting a Y in the chat for a yes, we'd love to see it. And if not, you can just raise your hand from home. Oh, I love this. Thank you, early contributors. You're helping with the stage fright. Ah, all right. Amazing. We'll keep it coming. So we've got a good bunch of writers in the crew. Is there anybody out there who is perhaps not doing the writing, but is part of another aspect of the content creation process? Maybe you're the ones who are helping to decide the topics, or you're building the articles that go online, or you manage a team that does it. If you are one of those, why don't you put M for management? Oh, okay. Interesting. So we have a lot of writers, which is great because honestly, that is what this presentation is geared towards. We were going to say, and if there's anyone out there who is part of another part of the process, honestly, this is relevant to everyone. We all know the excruciating pain of putting your time and talent into creating a story for your health organization, putting it out there in the world, and then circling back and finding that nobody clicked on it. Or if they did click on it, they clicked out of it 2 seconds later. It's frustrating for us writers. It's frustrating for the people managing the writers on their team because we all know there are a million things to do in every single day. And you know what? That person's time could perhaps have been used better. So a year and a half ago, about Hartford Healthcare did some real soul searching around this problem and tried to figure out how to solve it. And that's what this presentation is today. We're giving you all our secrets. I will just introduce myself quickly. I'm Laura Benish. I actually am a freelance writer. I write for several health organizations, but Hartford Healthcare is my favorite. I'm so excited that I have gotten to work with this team and be part of this process where they are really optimizing what they're writing and how they're writing. And then I'm going to turn it over to the in-house expert, the lovely Leah Vitchus.
Thanks, Laura. I'm Leah Vitchus. I'm a senior digital communications specialist with Hartford Healthcare, and most of my work is focused on our health news hub, especially the strategy, the distribution, and the editing. So Laura, I think unless you have anything else for the group, we can kick it right off here.
Let's go.
All right, so before we get started, we just wanted to give you guys a really high-level overview of who we are, show you the work that we're doing. We do run Hartford Healthcare's Health News Hub, which is our consumer-friendly blog that's aiming to answer the questions that people are actually asking about their health. Over the last couple of years, we've been on a journey, like Laura said, to really reimagine the work that we're doing, aiming to turn ourselves more from Hartford Healthcare news, press releases, things like that, to news really focused on consumer health and things that people are looking for. Today, we've been able to turn our Health News Hub into a content marketing machine that generates revenue and positions us as thought leaders in the industry. In the last year, we've had more than 2.5 million page views, up more than 1 million from the previous year, and reached nearly 2 million unique viewers. We publish stories every day using different experts across countless service lines. And we've built some massive distribution channels to go along with that, ranging from our weekly e-newsletter to our text alert, and now even social media. But if you're anything like me, you're probably a couple minutes away from popping open a new window and using us as background noise while you start multitasking. And we get it. Everyone here is really busy, so we're going to do our best to make sure that this is a really great use of your time. So before it's too late and anybody checks out, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you might want to pay attention using our own metrics from the last couple of years. So we'll start with page views. If you have a website, a blog, whatever you're writing for, page views are probably top of mind. Like I said earlier, we started this journey a couple of years ago, and when I look back at how far we've come, I can remember thinking that we had already peaked. There wasn't that much more left that we could change, and we couldn't possibly keep up with the growth that we'd already experienced. And if you're thinking the same thing right now, the good news is I was wrong. The user data looks even more striking. We're reaching a much larger audience than we were before. From 2022 to 23, those 1.6 million page views came from only about 600,000 people. But today, our page views are coming from nearly 2 million different people, which is really exciting. That means we aren't just relying on our distribution channels, we're actually reaching people organically from Google search. And next up is engagement time. This is really important because it shows that people aren't just popping open our stories and leaving right away, they're actually sticking around. And while these numbers don't look super impressive, it's only around 37 seconds on average. It's important to remember that most people leave a web page within 2 or 3 seconds. So unfortunately, those outliers are really dragging down the average, but our median engagement time is actually closer to 3 minutes. And lastly, this one is my favorite because it's probably the one that we've worked the hardest for, we've poured the most time into, but our leads or conversions, mostly in the form of health risk assessments or other form submissions, are up over 800% in the last 2 years. That means people aren't just engaging with our articles, they're actually taking it a step further and engaging with our calls to action and showing interest in scheduling an appointment or receiving care from one of our experts. Now, I've presented this slide a couple times recently and been really excited to show that we've cleared actually 1,000 leads this year because that's been a goal of ours since early 2022. And at no point did we think we would actually achieve it. But several times I've had people push back and ask, so what? Why do those leads matter? Are we sure it isn't a vanity metric? Do we have any reason to believe that people are actually following through and seeking care with us just from reading a Health News Hub story? And it's a really great question, but because I don't want anyone to ask it today, you guys are going to get a bonus 4th reason to pay attention. And that's our revenue that's been attributed to the News Hub itself. It takes us a little longer to get this data than it does the page views or the leads. So this is about a year behind, but this is our why. This is how we know that leads matter. This is where we see them converting. The same year where we saw a 500% increase in leads generated from the News Hub, we saw a very similar increase in both contribution margin and expected reimbursement. And it's a little preliminary, but I can tell you that we do know it's trending in the same direction this year as well. So if that data kind of aligns with your goals and some of the things that you might be working towards with your own writing, you're in the right place because we're going to show you exactly how we did it. And it all started with being way too competitive. These are just some quick stats, but what we're really showing you is that the blog industry is more competitive than ever before. We're not just competing with other health systems, we're competing with private bloggers, influencers, now even AI. And on top of all of that, we're competing with anything that people might rather be doing than reading a blog. So at the end of the day, having a blog, even having a good blog, isn't enough anymore. You have to find a way to set yourself apart. And Laura, I'll turn it back over to you for the next portion.
All right. Here we go, people. Bear with me. First question. Do we have anyone out there who considers themselves an angler? And by an angler, I mean a fisherman or a fisherwoman. If you do, I have put a handy fishing emoji in the chat. Feel free to copy and paste and put that right back in the chat for a quick survey. I have to tell you, there's no wrong answers here because I secretly am hoping that nobody fishes. Okay, this is good. This is actually encouraging. Y'all, I have included, and Leah has empowered me to include a lot of really cheesy fishing metaphors in here. There's a reason for this. First of all, usually the cheesier the metaphor, the easier to remember, right? Secondly, I have been dying for an excuse to talk about fishing. I try to work it into every conversation I can because about a year and a half ago, I decided I was going to be like Brad Pitt in A Rivers Runs Through It and become a master fly fisher. Hang on, there I am. I talked myself into, oh, sorry, Kim. All right, my symbol didn't work out in the chat. If you're a Fisher person, just sound off in the chat. This is me. I'm a nerd. I talked myself into doing an article where it was like a 200-word article. All it required was maybe one phone call. Instead, I took a 6-week fly fishing course. I had a full day. This is a picture from that day with like a master angler who took me out into the Farmington River. I used to practice my casting in the backyard. Do I remember anything from this? No, I don't. No, I don't. Have I become a master angler? No. Do you want to guess how many times I've been out fishing since? 0. But hopefully it'll come in handy for this presentation. So here's our metaphor. Here's how to catch a reader. The reader is the fish. The fish is the reader. Step 1, decide what you're fishing for. Look, obviously this goes without saying, but let's get back to basics. You're not going to go to the river if you're trying to catch a swordfish. You're not going to go to the ocean if you're trying to catch a freshwater trout. Your goal for what you're aiming for is what determines everything that you do when you're fishing, and it is the same for marketing. We all know the terrible yet helpful marketing funnel and what that means for all of us. You really have to start at the bottom and what you want to achieve, who you want to attract, what you want them to do, and reverse engineer everything you do from that point. What does this mean for market? Oh, I included a few vanity quotes. I don't know who any of these people are, so Tommy Bolton may not know what he's talking about. The best fishermen I know don't look for the fish, they look for the places where the fish hide. In marketing speak, this means identify and understand your target reader. And this is one of the things that Hartford Healthcare got ruthlessly strategic about doing. And it was really the first domino that toppled to change how effective their healthcare content was. Leah, back to you.
I don't feel in any way prepared to follow that. Laura, thank you.
I didn't know I was going to put a selfie in there. Thanks for calling.
So one of the best ways to decide what you're fishing for is to understand exactly who your target audience is and really hone in on those people. We're not wasting time writing content for people who aren't interested in what we have to offer. We're really writing for the people that we know want health news. But the question becomes, how do we find them? And before I answer that, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about how we don't find them because we spent years doing that, and maybe a couple of us are still doing it. Our stories used to originate really one of 4 ways. It was either a current event, a patient story, maybe a new doctor, service, technology, whatever else we wanted to market. And to be clear, there is still a place for that, but what we've started to find out is it is not our health news hub, because none of those categories are really answering questions that the average person might be asking. So instead, we took a step back and we focused on the questions that people do have. So now whenever a marketing priority does pop up, in this example, I use knee replacement, the very first thing that we do is ask ourselves, who is searching for this topic and what are they trying to find out? And that's kind of a big question in itself, but the good news is we have lots of tools to help us get to the bottom of it. And our favorite tool that we've come to rely on is keyword research. Anytime a topic or a priority is brought to us, the very first thing that we do is check the keyword research, in this case, WordStream. We search the relevant terms and see how they're ranking, what's the monthly search volume, and how competitive is it? And that really dictates whether or not we move forward with the story. If the search volume isn't great, we might still be able to write about that topic, but we have to find a new angle that will really draw people in. Usually the best way to find that angle is just to ask Google, because just like us, Google is optimizing their own content to the questions that people have. So one really easy way to do this is just to Google the topic and check out the related questions. They're a little blurry here, but a lot of those are probably future News Hub headlines. And if you don't get anything you can use from there, you do still have some options. One that we use a lot is Google Trends, which shows us related topics that are trending and can even give us some seasonality trends so we know when people are asking these questions. Quora on the left and Ahrefs on the right are two other great tools that we've been using more and more, and they bring up tons of questions that people want answered. But how do we know this new approach is working and that we shouldn't just go back to the way that we used to do things? That's a question that a lot of people are asking, and it makes sense because we did it that way for so long, and in many ways, we were very successful with that too. But this is how we know. Our stories used to be fairly successful, but we never saw content truly go viral until late 2022 when Laura Statton's story drove 350,000 views in just a couple of days. And while that was really exciting, it was the first time it had ever happened, so we tried not to get our hopes up too much. But in the next 2 months, we saw it happen twice more. Not quite to the same extent, but Martina Navratilova's diagnosis was trending on Google, and we were able to turn around another successful story that cleared 50,000 views. We also wrote a story about bell peppers. This one didn't come from keyword research. It actually came from an argument between our editors, but that's just as good. And it drove about 50,000 views in early February. And then the culmination of all of this. In July, we saw our 5 reasons to eat more watermelon clear 700,000 views and drive 420 leads, which tells us that people weren't just popping open the story, they were really taking the time to engage with it. And although a lot of those leads came internationally and those people were unlikely to convert and actually schedule an appointment with us, it still helps establish us as thought leaders in the industry. But I'll pause here and turn it back over to Laura for another word on fish.
Thank you, Leah. Oh, good. All right. So that was step one. Step one was really understanding what you're fishing for, and then think like a fish, get inside the fish's head. Step two is assemble your gear. I should put that picture of me back in there. I had a lot of gear on me. I didn't realize this. I used to think that fishing, and I'm sure for the minimalists out there, it is possible just to wander out to the side of a brook with like a rod in hand and that's it. But I took 6 weeks of classes and discovered that there is more gear out there than I ever imagined possible. By the time I was like wading out to the Farmington River, I had a hook on me, I had a net, I had 2 different poles, I had a whole assortment of different flies. I could keep going, I won't. Here's a lovely quote that I think illustrates it nicely. Because you know what? None of it was a waste. I needed to use almost every single thing out there, and I barely caught a tiny fish. But what if I hadn't had it? It might not have happened. In marketing speak, this means prepare, prepare, prepare. And this is a little bit back to the basics, but I think in the hamster wheel that is our crazy hectic lives as healthcare marketers, sometimes we forget to take time at the first step because we are so focused on just getting things across the finish line. So this is the preparation step of things. Leah, how do you start preparing?
So it sounds a little remedial, but to me, the first step of preparation is putting together an outline. I think if there's one thing my 6th grade English teacher really got right, it's to always have a plan on paper before you start writing. I scoffed at it then and I keep scoffing at it now, but recently it is something that I've become passionate about for a couple of different reasons. First, it forces me to do my research in advance. I don't go into an interview with a doctor blind, and that's really important. Our doctors are providing a lot of the substance, the meat of the story, but we have to be the ones providing the overall structure and the direction of the story. If we go into these conversations unprepared or without doing enough research, it lets the doctors really drive the conversation, and ultimately that means that they're driving the story structure as well. And in my experience, that doesn't usually end well. So it wasn't until I wrote maybe 10, 20 really disorganized stories that I realized it wasn't the actual writing that was going wrong, it was the preparation. I went into it with a plan in my head, but because I hadn't put it on paper, it was really easy for me to forget and lose focus on where I wanted to go. And by doing that, I wasn't getting the information that I needed to put a coherent article together. So today I write an outline like the one that you can see here, where I try to put my lead, my subheadings, my key points all together before I talk to the expert. Not every story goes to plan. Sometimes the doctor has an opinion that's different than what we expected, or we do choose to take the story in a different direction, but with an outline, it's never for a lack of preparation. And another personal affliction of mine, I get terrible writer's block, and maybe that affects some of you as well, but I found that a really comprehensive outline can actually help me push through that. A lot of times I start writing my lead, and if I struggle with that, then I have nowhere else to go, so it can take me a long time to get started. But when I already have that outline fleshed out, whatever section isn't coming easily to me, I can just skip right over and move to the next part because I already know where the article is headed. And the best part is I do a lot of the legwork in the beginning when I write that outline. So to me, writing the story seems a lot more doable than writing an article from scratch.
Right. And I had the benefit of sitting in on Leah sharing this technique as part of a workshop that we'll tell you about later. But honestly, it was so eye-opening for me. I fancy myself an experienced writer. I've been writing for many, many years / decades, but I had stopped doing an outline because I kind of already have things organized in my head and I think I can go about it. And it's not that I can't get away with not doing an outline, but Leah inspired me to actually put down a skeleton, like what she has here as her example, on the page before I even reach out to experts to interview them. And it really does contribute to a lot of efficiency in terms of how your time is used. And then it also really helps for me as someone who tends to get in the weeds. It helps me not get in the weeds. It helps me stay focused on what the readers actually care about, right? That what's actually going to hook them. And this segues nicely into when we're talking about preparation, starting with by thinking it through. It really starts with researching and brainstorming why the topic and the angle that you have picked actually matters. So maybe you know that you needed to do an article about knee pain. You went to Google and you found out what people are asking about it. You discovered your angle that is going to be, why do my knees hurt in the morning? That's your in, because who hasn't experienced that? You know, that's one of the grand traditions of aging. That's your, so what? So take time now to research and brainstorm what makes this topic life-changing for someone. And this sounds hyperbolic, but honestly, for someone who wakes up with debilitating knee pain, if they get some answers to it, that actually could be life-changing. Or if someone wakes up with knee pain and it's not a big deal, but they get reassurance that it's normal, that is also life-changing, right? What might make it surprising? Maybe there's something that someone didn't realize they were sleeping on their side and they need to stop doing that, and that'll solve it. What makes it relatable? Sometimes it's what makes it rare. What makes it emotional? In health news stories, it's kind of hit or miss with this one, but our health is deeply tied to our emotions. So lots of times you can find an emotional hook. What makes it impressive? We're marketers, right? We're trying to sell our health system. So of course we would never fail to call out something that our experts are doing that not just anybody can do. But sit down, actually take the time to ask yourself these questions, and it can make a big difference, right? Then I like to go back and pick 2 or 3 of the above and plan my interview questions around them. And I'm going to pause here because I'm curious for a quick yes or no. This is another one of those, there's no wrong answers. I just always love hearing how other writers work. How many of you actually write out interview questions before you get on the phone or Zoom or email exchange with an expert? If you want to do like a Y or an N for no and yes. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's a mix here. Sue, I really appreciate you admitting that you don't. Because I'm not going to lie, I don't always follow my own advice either. And not everybody needs to. Leah, you unmuted, I see. Leah, do you write down your interview questions first?
Actually, plot twist, I do. I
do.
don't think I could possibly focus if I did.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to because I get nervous on the phone. And so if I'm talking to an expert, I'll just, I'll do better if I do. Anyway, the one other tip or trick, if you're not already doing this, I highly recommend it. It helps keep me focused. When you are reflecting on the so what of your topic and angle, once you've thought it all through, in one short sentence, sum up why you think this story matters. I first learned this trick back in the days when everybody was handing out actual print business cards. And the tactic I heard was make sure it can fit on the back of a business card. So it's not just one sentence, it's one short sentence. Sum up why you think it matters. I remember for one Hartford Healthcare story, I think my so what was tiny technology makes breast cancer surgery less painful. That was it. That was the so what. And then add it to your interview questions. At some point when you're going to be talking to your expert, usually I put this at the end of my list of questions to ask. Say, will you talk about how tiny technology makes breast cancer surgery less painful? Your expert will hold forth on why that is the case. And if you're lucky, it could wind up being an amazing lead for your article. It could wind up being a slam bang conclusion. It could be, you could split that quote into two and it could be both. So again, this is all about the preparation, making sure that you're ready before you ever even reach out to your expert. I highly recommend it. And just keep in mind, your questions, your article is going to need to do two things. So make sure that your questions cover all or most of them. It needs to inform. These are the classic journalism questions we all know. But it also, in this day and age, to catch a reader, you have to keep them entertained. And so these are the elements that, we think of as entertaining. This is the bits that's actually going to stop the scroll so that someone clicks on your article in the first place and then keeps them scrolling through your article because they want to read what's coming next. So, will your questions cover most or all of these? And who doesn't love a bonus? Who doesn't? Thank you for empowering my cheesy animation as well, Leah. I will just pause on this slide for a second because I always love concrete examples. Here are some of my other go-to questions that I like to work into my list. Basically, if I'm not feeling super inspired, I will use these as a grab bag, and usually it results in a pretty good quote. My ultimate favorite of this is the fourth one. I probably should have put it first or last. So if I'm hearing you correctly, and then restate what you think you heard, and then say, is that right? Either you will, hopefully you'll be fact checking as you do this, but I'll tell you 9 times out of 10, even if what you got was exactly right, your expert is going to wind up talking more about it. They'll say, yes, that's exactly it because XYZ, XYZ, and then you have more quotes to go with. Oh, right. This brings us to what we thought would be a good sidebar, which is dealing with doctors. What are some common problems that you all run into when you are interviewing doctors for your health articles? If you feel like putting it in the chat, I think we will all be able to come together as a support group around this. Leah, maybe you could kick it off in the chat. Not to put you on the spot. Their schedules, yes. Oh, Leah, you didn't even need to. They've got this covered. Language. Yeah, the high level. Lindsay, they're always 15 minutes late, or they've made me block off my entire afternoon and they never call. Yes. Jane, just yes. So yeah, we've talked about the issues with dealing with doctors. I think that if we go back to preparing your questions, you actually wind up getting ahead of a lot of the problems. Well, we'll never be able to get around their scheduling issues. But when we talk about issues like Kim Thompson mentioned, they're talking at too high of a level. Jane, language. Time constraints, I fit that into the issues with their language as well and talking too high level because they are so busy. They just go into robot mode and they recite off what they've memorized in their giant brains from their clinical literature. So lots of times you wind up, if you ask great questions though, you can trick them into giving great answers. And that's partly where how would you explain this to a patient, that top question? If you could just keep guiding them back to that, it really helps a lot. And Leah, I know you have other thoughts on this.
I have so many thoughts on this.
So many.
So I'm glad you mentioned the am I hearing you correctly note, because I stole that after your last presentation. I've been using it and it's my favorite way to restate something that they said that sounds really, really difficult and say, okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, and then say it just in the most plain, standard language. And if they say yes, then I feel like that's my green light to use that in my story instead. So that's hack number one. I love doing that. They do not appreciate it, but it's a blast. But I do have some other tricks that I've learned from some of the writers on our team. I feel like they've helped me a lot, especially on first contact with doctors. Usually for us, that's over email, and that can get really tricky. So the first thing is really to remember how valuable their time is and understand that while the news hub might be my sole priority, it's not theirs. So I always give them a reason why it matters right up front. In our case, that might be mentioning how many viewers we reach, how large our distribution channels are, even how many page views they might expect their story to get, so that they know that it's really worth their time. And the next thing I try to do is familiarize them with our writing style as quickly as possible so that it doesn't come as a surprise when they see the first draft, which always comes as a surprise. So if I'm sending them an introductory email, I might link the news hub when I tell them who I am, or I might even link my own author profile so that they get a sense of my writing if they take the time to look at it and they know exactly what they're getting into. I think this has been really important for kind of tempering expectations. They just go into that interview knowing that their quotes are going to be changed a little bit and they're not going to be running in a scientific journal. And I think that makes them a little bit more comfortable. And along those same lines, one of our other freelancers actually made a terrific little boilerplate just for the Health News Hub, where we drop a note about the importance of readability. We remind the experts that if our story doesn't hit a specific readability score, which I'll talk about later, it's not going to rank on Google and it probably won't reach very many people. And that tends to ease a little bit of their surprise when they do see this quotes that I rewrote. So those are probably my top tips for dealing with doctors, but I know there's a lot more that I didn't cover.
Yeah, that's such good stuff. If anyone else has tips that they want to throw into the chat that we can either reflect on now or honestly just to have up there for folks to look at as we keep going. And also, I forgot to ask in an earlier slide about all of your favorite interview questions. There are so many good ones out there. And I know Leah and I are always trying to like scoop up yours as ours. So if you want to put any favorite interview questions in there, and or any tips for dealing with doctors, you will have a grateful audience. While that's happening, I'm going to keep moving this along. Okay, so step one, decide what you're fishing for. Step two, make sure you've got all your gear, aka make sure you're prepared. Step three, make sure your bait stands out. What do I mean by this? When I walked into a fishing supply store, imagine my surprise to find that it looked like the most glorious arts and crafts section of the most glorious Michaels I had ever imagined. It is filled with the kinds of things that my 6-year-old niece has stocked in her art cubby. It had pom-poms, feathers, sequins. It was filled with shiny, beautiful objects. And that's because when you are trying to hook a fish like objects that are shiny. They like objects that are pretty, that remind them of that they're going to get a good meal out of this. And so you have to make it stand out. Random fishing quote for your enjoyment. What does this mean for marketing? It means use clever formatting. You know, we're so used to, as writers, thinking about content is king. Content is king. The substance of it is what matters. Yes, it does matter, but honestly, if it doesn't look good at a glance, what we were finding is that people never find that out because they don't read it. So it needs to look good at a glance. And luckily, there are some really clever formatting tips that we can use to do that. And I will say, for clever formatting, does anyone want to hazard any guesses what we're about to talk about when it comes to formatting best practices? Again, we're talking about health news stories that are, you know, for just a general audience. Like, what do you think might help readers skim through them while they're on their mobile phone and also cooking dinner and on a Zoom for their second side hustle job? Lindsay, ding, ding, ding. Yeah, as Lindsay put in the chat, bullets, short sentences, conversational. Lindsay, do you just want to hop up here as a panelist? Subheads are huge. All right, Leah, take it from here.
Absolutely. So what can we do to really make our blogs stand out? It starts, obviously, as we all know, with a great headline, because only about 20% of the people who actually read your headline will go down and read the rest of the story. But there are a few things that we can do to improve those odds. One is getting the information right up to the top of the page, all the really important information. That can help bait readers, especially if we're able to generate some intrigue while we do it. And it's also important to remember that most viewers do skim rather than read. And it can kind of be our tendency to fight them on that, but it's important to work with them instead. They're going to skim, whether we like it or not. So build a skimmable story that keeps moving them down the page.
Hold on.
Oh, so we've
Did
got
I
a
say-
little video in here if it'll cooperate.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Here we go.
Is it
right.
working?
It's
Oh,
beautiful. It's perfect.
technology.
So this is just a quick example of how we used to do things. It's actually a really compelling and well-written story. It's really interesting, but at a quick glance, you might not be feeling compelled to read it. There are no subheadings, no bullet points, no short sentences or paragraph variation. So nothing is really jumping out at you off the page. Instead, it looks a little bit wordy, maybe a little bit overwhelming, and you might decide to scroll past the story before you've even finished reading the headline. But here's what we're trying to do instead. This article, there it is. This article has really engaging subheadings that make you really curious and make you want to learn more, along with some bullet points, tons of variation in both sentence and paragraph length. And together it makes the story seem a lot less daunting. It doesn't look like it's going to take a lot of your time. It looks like it'll be really easy to read it. So we might be tempted to stick around a little bit longer in this case. So if you took anything away from those two examples, it was probably the power of subheadings. I think that to me is what really jumped out and made me really more interested in that second story because it was broken up. It wasn't just one big block of text. It was broken up and looked really interesting. There were different parts of the story and I could pretty much find out what was happening in the story by the time I finished skimming the subheadings. These are a must. So here are a couple suggestions to make yours really stand out. First, we know that most of the time blog readers are just skimming and they may never make it to the copy below each subheading. But I heard someone say that as writers, we have the opportunity to control how our readers skim, and I really liked it, so I stole it. We get to decide what it is that catches their eye, what they notice, and in what order, so really make the most of that opportunity. You want the most important information that you have on the page, or I'm sorry, you want the most prominent information that you have on the page to be the most important thing that you have to say. Next, make your subheadings informative. If they are going to skim, make sure that your viewers leave the page knowing exactly what the point of your story was. As a tip, read through your subheadings when you're finished writing the story and see if they really get the gist of the story just from reading the subheadings alone. They should really summarize your article. And every time I present, I talk about making subheadings engaging, but I'm taking it up for I'm taking it up a notch for you guys. Now we're making them irresistible. We know that a lot of readers are looking to skim, and we've made our peace with that. But secretly, I haven't made my peace with that at all. Just like a headline, the subheadings are one of your best chances to convince the reader to read the copy below. So don't miss it. I think it's really, really easy, especially in healthcare, to kind of go back to some of the same old questions. What are the causes, the symptoms, the treatments, and so on. And while those do need to be answered, how can we take it a step further and change our subheadings up a little bit to make them really irresistible? Maybe that means we're using a variety of questions and short declarative sentences, maybe some longer sentences that give a really compelling piece of information, or maybe you're just hinting at something without being overly clever that does generate intrigue. And here's what that looks like.
And Leah, you'll see I swapped in a different example. Maybe I'll just take this one.
Yeah, no, take it away.
Poor Leah. I'm just springing things on you. So this is is it safe to take melatonin every night? I think that this hopefully does most of what Leah was talking about in that slide. The first test that we sort of like to do for subheads, it won't work exactly every time, but it's fun to aim for, is if you just read the subheads of your story, will you wind up with your so what statement? So, what is melatonin and is the supplement version safe? For some people, it helps with falling asleep sooner. It's great for jet lag or temporary sleep issues. Do your research before choosing a brand, though. Melatonin isn't for everyone. Even if it's safe to take melatonin every night, you shouldn't. So even if you're getting someone who is highly distractible, if they just read the subheadings, you actually get the most important information over to them, almost as important, or perhaps more important, depending who you are on the team. You got them down to the bottom of the page where they can click on another opportunity for a CTA. Another thing that these subheadings do well, relevant, informative, yeah, irresistible. Irresistible. Leah, thank you for working the word bait into your previous talking points.
It wasn't easy, but I had to have some fish references.
Oh, yeah, and bullet points. We love bullet points.
Yeah, so that's another thing that sounds really simple, and to some extent it is pretty simple, but here are 5 quick tips to make your bullet points just a little bit sharper. The first thing is to make them symmetric. I'll be the first to say, sometimes it just isn't possible, but if you are able to pull it off, the visual appeal is huge because asymmetric bullet points can look a little bit awkward, a little bit clunky. So the closer you can get them all to being uniform, especially in length, the better they'll look once they're public. Second, just like the subheadings, make them informative. Anybody who's read my stories knows I love a good list, but it gets really easy to just write a bulleted list and leave it at that, without giving your readers any context or understanding of why you chose those items. And that'll really leave your readers with more questions than answers. So whatever you are listing out, explain why those items made the cut. Third, keep them concise. This one's flexible. The length of your bullet points will be dictated by your content. So sometimes it's just single words, whereas other times it might be full sentences or even a very short paragraph. But if you can't condense the content to ideally 1 or 2 sentences, you might want to rethink whether or not it's the right place for bullet points or if you're forcing them somewhere that they don't belong. Fourth, start with a verb. It's pretty intuitive. And again, it's just a best practice. There are always exceptions, but if you're feeling creative and you have a different way to style your bullet points that makes sense, try it out. But if not, starting bullet points with a verb makes them really actionable and easy to follow. And lastly, don't include too many items on your bulleted list. Again, it's pretty obvious, but just don't get carried away. The general rule of thumb is to use no more than 7 bullet points at a time. And if you have more, you might want to find a way to subcategorize them and break them into smaller sections. So this is an example of what that looks like. I picked this one because for the most part, I imagine that we're all doing bullet points pretty well already. But longer bullet points, at least for me, can get a little bit tricky, especially when you're writing paragraphs or even in this case, pulling in doctor quotes. You can see at a glance, they're pretty symmetric. They're all 3 lines and most of them have a similar amount of words, even a similar amount of characters. And as far as content goes, I really like that they're giving very actionable suggestions. Obviously, this topic was fairly conducive to actionable suggestions, but if I'm going to read an article, I'm typically skimming right down to the bulleted list and looking for an action that I can take today, something I can do to make my life a little bit different. So I think this example really nailed that.
Okay. Step 4, reel them in. You've got them on the hook. Now you got to reel them in. This is a pretty apt quote. The best way to catch a fish is to let him think he's escaping. I think in marketing speak, this means make your story so easy and enjoyable to read that your readers won't want to stop. It's just that simple. And the fun thing is there's a way to measure this. And Leah is an expert on it.
So if you aren't sure if you're writing readable content or even how to write readable content, there's a really easy tool for that. The great thing about readability is it sounds kind of subjective, but it can actually be calculated using this Flesch reading ease formula. All the elements that Laura's just been talking about contribute to readability score, which impacts the way that Google ranks content. If your score is too low, Google will consider that an accessibility issue and they'll typically bury that content. It'll be very hard to get it on the first page of Google. In New England, we're typically aiming for a score between a 60 or a 70, meaning that it can be easily understood by 13 to 15-year-old students. And I always like to pause on that because it specifies easily understood, which is different from easily read. Just because our consumers can read something doesn't mean that they can easily understand it. So if it reads like a scientific journal that our viewers have to struggle to get through, we're going to lose them right away. The way that we typically monitor these readability scores is with Yoast, which we like the best because, as you can see here, It gives us a green smiley face if we do a good job. But smiley faces aside, it also gives us a lot of great tips to improve our writing. It calls out passive voice, sentence length, transition words, and lets us know if we don't have enough subheadings. But there are a lot of other ways to see the same thing. Some of the other tools that we have available, my favorite is Hemingway. It has a convenient, or it shows you a lot of great different things that you might want to do differently. So you can see, even in this really small example, it highlighted a few words that could be swapped out to help us write a little bit tighter and be even more impactful with our word choice. Grammarly is another one that's favored by a lot of our team members because it has a convenient plugin and it can easily track readability scores right into your Word documents and offer helpful tips right there where you're working. And lastly, Good Calculators. This one isn't my favorite because it doesn't tell you much besides your readability score, but it can be a really helpful way to double check yourself before submitting your work for publication. And lastly, grade yourself. This is what that looks like in practice. It's one thing to know why we should incorporate visual formatting into our articles, things like bullet points, subheadings, but I think seeing it presented this way really makes a difference. The second story isn't just more appealing visually, but it actually reads a lot better too. So bear with me, but we're going to test that theory. Here goes. By itself, knee crunching sound generally not cause for concern. The crunching sound from your knee is crepitus. If you do not have any other symptoms, no specific treatment is necessary for crepitus. If you develop other knee problems, however, you should see a doctor to have your knee evaluated. Not that bad, but doesn't really roll off the tongue. I'd love to read the whole thing and drive the point home, but I'm sure you guys are getting the idea, so I'll move right to the second one. Why do my knees crack when I squat? The human body is full of surprises, and sometimes it just refuses to stay quiet about it. Here's looking at you, knees. Why do our knees crack when we stand, sit, or squat? And is there anything that we can do about it? So you probably don't need a calculator to tell you which one of those is a little bit more appealing, but just in case, here's the difference in readability scores. So while our story could be easily understood by a 13-year-old, the other story would be best understood by an advanced degree holder. Again, we can all read that story, but it's not easy to understand what it's saying right away. It's not always this stark of a difference, but typically any story that's scoring below a 50 will be either challenging or just less appealing to read. So how are we doing with our readability scores at Hartford Healthcare? It's easy to tell people to use bullet points and write subheadings, but the key is to really implement those changes over time until all of our writers are able to consistently produce readable stories. And this is what that looks like. In November of 2022, when we first started focusing on readability scores, our average was a 47. We're lucky to have a team full of great writers, so they were already doing pretty well before any of us realized how important readability truly is. But today, after spending a year and a half prioritizing readability and working with our team, our stories are actually averaging a score of 63. And here's where we actually see that pay off. As our readability scores continue to increase, our engagement times actually increase alongside it. There's no question that improving our readability scores has allowed us to create more visually appealing content, which keeps viewers on the page longer.
And Leah, correct me if I'm wrong, is there a tool right in Microsoft Word for checking the grade level of your reading? Maybe someone in the chat knows this too. We can circle back to that.
No idea.
I think there is. And so even if your organization hasn't subscribed to some of the services, thank you, Kim. Kim put in the chat what it's called. So that's another way to go about exactly what Leah's talking about.
I'm learning. So there is a free option for Grammarly that you can plug into Microsoft Word as well, but this sounds much more convenient. So we'll have to check that out.
I don't think it highlights what you need to change the way that Grammarly does, but it will at least give you a score. So it's a starting point.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm gonna skip this slide in the interest of time because we want to make sure there's enough time at the end. So a lot of what Leah is talking about, a lot of what readability means is conversational writing. What I was going to ask the group is if you all are already doing this. I'd be really curious to hear it. I think healthcare organizations are often slower to adapt to, more casual forms of communications than others for many reasons. Conversational writing, though, for Hartford Healthcare's Health News Hub, it has really been one of the keys, it seems like, to making these articles much more effective, probably because people are staying on the page, like Leah just showed in the previous slide. So what is conversational writing? You know, it really boils down to a few key things. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, here is an example. Second person instead of third person, right? Instead of writing an article about if someone is wondering whether to take charcoal pills, here are some answers. It's if you're wondering whether to take charcoal pills. Relatable. Now you're going to use examples that someone will say, oh, I feel seen. For example, in this lead, I'm terrible about changing the Brita filter in my Brita, and I'm hoping I'm not the only one. So known for its ability to absorb toxins and for being the key ingredient in that Brita filter you desperately need to change, et cetera, et cetera. And then lots of transitions. And by transitions, we mean words and phrases like and, so, but. Yes, it's more casual to start a sentence with so or but it's actually really helps it feel like you're having a one-on-one conversation with the reader, and that makes them trust your brand more. You'll also see here in the here's why not to take charcoal pills, you know, get in there with first, second, third. Transition words, they give your readers clues about what's coming next, and that is a way to keep them reading because they feel like they've got their head around this. One important note, though, you can go online. I actually did this and found it really helpful. Just Google transition words. There are lists out there that you can find your favorite, bookmark it, refer to it when you're writing. Just a word of caution. Be selective in what you use. Only use things that you would actually say in conversation. Yeah. When we're talking about conversational writing too, I think, you know, we often run into issues where our experts, hang on one second. Oh, okay. So what does it mean? It's like talking to a friend. It's warm and reassuring. It makes it about the reader. And, you know, in healthcare, why is this so important? People are scared often when it comes to their health. They're avoiding the thing that they're scared of. Maybe instead of talking to their doctor about it, they are turning to Google and finding your article instead. If you can make them feel safe, if you can make them feel like they are not being spoken down to, they're that much more likely to reach out, schedule an appointment, get the care that they need. That's great for them. That is great for your organization and for your experts. Quick word on this. If you ever need to make the case for conversational writing, I know we run into this a lot with doctors. They have this wealth of knowledge with very precise clinical language that we cannot use. We have to translate it into something that sounds like a conversation that the average person is having with one another who hasn't been to medical school. They worry sometimes that they're not going to sound like experts if their article is in the context of something more conversational. Leah, you have a great way of sneakily persuading them into this. What is it that you tell doctors?
Yeah, so I'll usually try to remind the doctors that as writers in the healthcare industry, we really have an advantage. And I think we can actually be extra conversational because we have the advantage of not only having the doctor's credentials, which they love to hear, but also having like our logos all over the page. So if you're writing for a health system, it's probably very clear to the reader that this is coming from a pretty reliable source and they're expecting that this information is coming from doctors. So I think it gives us the chance to be a little bit more conversational and talk a little bit more casually because we have the doctor's credentials right there on the page. So they're going to know that that's coming from an expert, regardless of the language that we're using.
I am going to speed through some of the hacks that we use because of time. Don't worry, I'm about to give you all of this information in one handy dandy place. So if you want to just download this resource, it has everything that was on those previous slides that I just blazed past, and you may or may not find it helpful.
That has been sitting on my desk for 1.5 years.
Oh, that makes me so happy. If for any reason it does not work, the QR code doesn't work, just reach out to me. You'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to share it directly. All right. Step 5, final step for how to catch a reader. Teach your team how to fish. We all know that great quote. Give someone a fish, you feed them for a day, teach them how to fish and feed them for a lifetime. Hartford Healthcare, one of the revolutionary things that they have done is after discovering all of these secrets to more successful content, they put on their writers' calendars to come in, get together, and learn about them. And those are the writers' workshops. And Leah has been one of the driving forces. So why don't you explain what that is?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to hit this pretty quickly, but essentially we bring all of our writers from all over the state together. We get everybody in the same room. We try to aim for once a quarter. You can see a sample agenda on the left side and a sample response to the writers workshop that we were very excited about on the right side. So we've been doing this for about 1.5 years now. Like I said, we try to get together every quarter. We go through, usually we start by looking at the growth that we've seen over the last quarter, and it is always astounding. Every quarter, I'm like, it can't be that much growth this quarter. Like, we've been doing things well for a long time. It can't be that impressive. It is always that impressive, and it will always be that impressive if you guys keep following some of these tips and doing a few of the things that you've seen here. And we also check out new research, trends in our current stories, try to identify some areas that we can work on, and we bring in experts on a variety of topics. So you can see on this agenda, we've got very different topics going on, but a lot of great things that people can really incorporate into their writing. It's become an event that we all really look forward to. We get free lunch. Everybody's very excited about the lunch, and everybody right up from our newest team members right through our vice president takes so much away from it. And it's just something we get really excited about, really look forward to. It's become a really beloved event. Laura, do you want to just quickly show a couple of these?
Yeah, here are examples of some of the
Sure.
interactive activities that we've done. We like to use a lot of surveys, create games, or adapt existing games. Leah did this amazing individual report card where she told people which of their stories had done the best over the past quarter and in what ways. That kind of information is just so empowering for everyone on your team, no matter how long they've been doing this. It just feels great to know that your stories matter and why. Please ignore the fun. Leah challenged me to find an inquisitive fish quote. So sorry that we haven't left more time at the end of this, but I know we welcome any of your questions in whatever time you all have left.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Again, you can reach out to either or both of us. Probably LinkedIn is the easiest way to look us both up, right? And I think we're happy to share any and all of these resources. And clearly we could talk about this all day because an hour just flew by. Also, if you want to take me fly fishing.
Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to attend. I know it's a bigger ask than you might expect to have somebody come for an hour and listen to us ramble at you about writing. But it's something that I know Laura and I have so much of a passion for, and it sounds like you guys do too. So this has really been a blast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I see a comment about our question in the chat about having the deck. Yeah, we'll reach out to the lovely Emily Clifford from NESHCO and see if there's a way that we can get it to all of you. All right, Emily, is there anything else?
That's it. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much for having us, Emily.
Pleasure.